Hello and welcome to the Two and Under podcast. We've had a little bit of a break this week. We've had a little bit of time to cool down after the transfer window. We're going to talk about Newcastle United's summer of discontent that has just been. It's maybe a good job we've had 10 days or so to cool down, like I said, because there was some high emotions flying around the day before the transfer window closed. So it's actually been good to have time to sort of just settle down a bit. And obviously, Paul Mitchell has done his interview. So we'll get into that. We'll talk about what happened, why it happened, and what it might mean for the future. Because it's probably fair to say it's a bit of a the brakes are on the project a little bit, maybe from what we were sold and what we expected. So with me to talk through this today is Dimi. Dimi, I know that you had a rant written, ready and raring to go about the whole situation. So most of that's still probably applicable, is it?
It's definitely still applicable. I was ready to go to record something, and then a few things happened here at home, and I was sort of given the word that I wasn't to be recording the sort of things that I wanted to say on camera. But nah, look, I'm still obviously very disappointed and probably a little bit less emotional 2 weeks after the fact, or a week and a half after the fact. But yeah, definitely still very disappointed.
It's no doubt as well that the results that we've got, even though the performances haven't been great, the results have actually been good. So I think they've stopped a lot of the tensions and because there was anger, and there was frustration around, and quite rightly so, I think, with the way things went. But the team have managed to scrape some results, and we're unbeaten. So going into the international break on the back of three undefeated league games and then 3 in the cup, even though we could have very feasibly lost all 4 of those games, it's been a good start in that sense. So that's definitely helped keep the lid on things a bit, I think. So let's just have a little recap for anyone who's been living under a rock for the last 3 months about exactly what's happened in the world of Newcastle United. And we've talked about some of this on podcasts over the last couple of weeks, but it kind of all started in sort of June time when we were making the moves for Lloyd Kelly and Tosin of Fulham, who then went to Chelsea. And that it didn't seem that significant at the time because we didn't know what was going to happen. But I think that actually missing out on him had a knock-on effect on the rest of the summer in terms of the transfer business. So we'll talk about that. But that's what happened in June. And then towards the end of June, the PSR scramble that happened meant that we had to sell Elliot Anderson and Yankuba Minte for combined 65 million. We've ended up with your friend Vlachodimos, John Ruddy, Lloyd Kelly, and then we made Lewis Hall's transfer permanent and we signed William Asula. So that was around 65 million. So around 65 million in, around 65 million out in total. Then Paul Mitchell arrived about 4 days after the whole PSR stuff had happened. Then Staveley and Gadusi lost their jobs, and it does seem like they lost their jobs. They didn't want to go. They were sort of pushed, I think it's fair to say, and that's sort of come out. And there's been a lot of kind of upheaval. Then there was the whole Mark Gay thing that happened, which everyone was sick to the back teeth of. So that's what happened. How do you sort of reflect, Dimi, on all of that now, sitting here about 10 days or so after it's all finished? And it's good that the transfer window is over, I think, regardless of the outcome. We just needed it to be over so we can focus on the football again. But how do you reflect on all of that stuff that went on sitting here now?
Yeah, it was a shambles, to be honest. Right from the start of the transfer window, leading up to the end of the financial year, where we were scrambling to sell players, and we all thought that we'd have to sell, but until the last day or two, we knew the desperation that we actually needed to sell. Otherwise, if we did it, we could be facing an 8 or 9 or 10 point ban, and that would have been an absolute disaster for us. And that may have had a knock-on effect for some of our key players. They may not have stuck around. They might have jumped ship as well. And I'm not sure if the club thought initially that Bruno was going to be sold off and if his release clause was going to be picked up by City or someone else, and they were probably potentially banking on 100 million pounds coming into the coffers, and that would have solved the problem. But I just find it staggering that they had no sort of backup plan, and it came to the last day or two where we were still trying to scramble to sell players. Surely we knew there was a skeleton staff initially when the new owners took charge, but I'm sure there would have been many accountants or many people in the finance team telling them what the position is. It wasn't as if we only found out 2 days before the 30th of June. So that first part, I call it, there's sort of two parts that I say. The first part was not a disaster, but it really looked bad from a PR perspective, and it really, I think it definitely ruffled the feathers of the squad. Obviously, everyone was up for grabs in the last couple of days, it seemed, because we were that desperate to sell. If we didn't end up selling Anderson or Minter, who knows who may have had to be sold. So that first part was a disaster from the PR perspective, and then the second part, after Mitchell came in, it turned into one of those transfer windows we were used to back under Ashley. It was a lot of paper talk, a lot of rubbish, and in the end, no signings. There was just no Chef Kikuchi to come in at the end just to save the day. It was sort of back to yesteryear in terms of rubbish transfer windows, rubbish deadline days, a lot of promises. We're going to spend money. We're not going to spend money. So at the end of the day, I think that we've really screwed ourselves, to be honest, and we are playing a massive game of Russian roulette for the next 4 months until January, where we can spend money if we want to. And I think we'll talk about it in a sec, but it's been a shocking summer for us, and thank goodness we have got those 3 good results plus the cup result. I mean, God forbid we lost all 3 Premier League games and were knocked out of the cup. I think the discontent would have turned, I think, nuclear on Tyneside. So thank goodness we've got some results.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely kept a lid on things, like we said. I think that the PSR stuff was it was a bit of a shock. Like, obviously, like you said, people in the club knew that this was going to happen, and I'm convinced that they thought they were going to sell Bruno at some point, because if they had have done that, there wouldn't have been this whole sort of the optics around having to scramble to sell players, losing 2 really talented young players who've both started well at their new clubs as well. I think the whole, like, everything around that was very damaging, and I think, could it have been that cost Staveley and Murdad their jobs? Probably. I think, there's been a lot of talk since Mitchell did his interview about, previous windows and what went wrong, and this is the first one that Eddie Howe has not had much of a say in, and look what's happened. And we seem to do good business before, but it was negligent for the club to get into a position where we were 1 day away from getting a 10-point deduction. And I think whoever's responsible for that, and whether it was Staveley or Darren Eales or whoever, Piff cannot have been happy with that, because that's embarrassing, and that's clubs that are well run shouldn't get into that situation. And I don't think any of us thought that we weren't well run up until that point. We've been saying for the last almost 3 years now, let's just trust what's happening and trust the process, and we've done that because performances have been good on the pitch. Eddie Howe has had the team playing to a really high standard, but there's a lot of stuff going on off the pitch still, which is yet to catch up with what's happened on the pitch. And the success came on the pitch early, much earlier than what we thought. But the whole, obviously, everything off the pitch has not got to that level yet. And like you just said, there was still like a skeleton staff. So something's gone badly wrong somewhere. We've been spending a lot of money in the last 2 years, but to have got to that position really is negligent, and heads should roll, and it looks like they have, if that's what Staveley and Gudusi have gone for. And I know that the Piff head honchos were here as well last weekend watching the Spurs game, and I don't know if they've laid a few told a few people off, knocked a few heads together. It seems possibly they have done that, because we can't be in a situation where we get like that again, because that's not the sign of a well-run football club. And I think that's sort of carried over that sort of feeling. And PSR in general, there's a lot of clubs that are worried about it now because of what happened with Everton and Forest last season, and it's taken about a decade for this to actually start affecting clubs and the business they're doing and all of that sort of stuff. But it was a slow market in general this summer, probably because of that, because a lot of clubs are worried about what's going on. But how much do you attribute what happened subsequently to the whole boardroom upheaval, the fact that Staveley and Gudusi, who they were sort of running the club, they were minority owners, but they seem to be sort of running things, and they've made all these grand statements before about winning the Champions League in 5 years and spending every penny we've got in every transfer window. And, Eddie Howe's going to be here forever. He's our Alex Ferguson, but they've gone now. So how much do you think that has caused unsettlement and discontent at the club generally this summer, or just a general feeling of anxiety around the place that there's been these changes and nobody really knows where they stand and what's going on?
Yeah, I don't think it's helped. It's definitely a lot different, and I think when we had George Colkin on, about how it is definitely different now at the club. It's not the same club that it was 2.5 years ago, where there was that feel good factor. Everyone was sort of on the same page, and it was sort of happiness from board level all the way down to the boot starter. But it definitely ruffled the sort of sacking, you should say, of or the forced sale of Staveley and Gudusi. But I wouldn't put that as the sole reason why everything turned to shit for the rest of the transfer window. There's still enough. There should have been enough senior people at the club to get more business done, and it's what happens when they take over a club who's got, like you said, no staff. We've run ourselves really poorly for a very long time. It's going to take time to become a professional club, both on and off the pitch. So I think we've done the right thing by getting all these key people in place, and whether they're the right people, we're not sure. But those roles are important to fill, and Staveley and Gudusi probably had to have their sort of reined in, so to speak, a little bit, because that's not how top clubs are run. They're run by CEOs, CFOs, football directors, and not run by sort of like a mum and pop store. I sort of liken it to. They did great things for us, but we had to become a little bit more savvy and professional in the market. It's unfortunate what's obviously happened now in the subsequent weeks after they've left, but I don't think it was the sole reason why we've sort of turned to shit in this transfer window.
It's interesting as well because the transfer windows up till now have largely been, apart from January when we didn't have any money to spend, but the first transfer window we bought all those players towards the end, and then in the second transfer window we bought Isak and Botman and really improved the squad a lot. And then since then we got Gordon in that January, and then everyone knows what we did last summer when we bought Tonali and Barnes and Hall and Livramento. But there was a lot of Eddie Howe's fingerprints all over the transfer windows up until that point. Even though people say he doesn't like buying from overseas, and we got Botman and Isak. Botman had been a long-term target, and Isak seemed to be a bit opportunistic when we had the money there and he was available, and we needed a striker to help Wilson. So yeah, like he said himself that he took on a sort of de facto director of football role in some of those transfer windows. And I think something that has been overlooked a bit is that Dan Ashworth went as well, because he went in February. But like you was just saying before, they want to get these key people into key positions, and we've got chief operating officer, chief commercial officer, chief finance officer. We've got all of these. We've got this corporate structure in place now. We did try and get Dougie Freedman from Palace, so we couldn't get him. And apparently Eddie Howe had approved Dougie Freedman, and he didn't know much about Paul Mitchell, or he wasn't previously sort of informed that Paul Mitchell was going to be coming in. So there's definitely been a lot of upheaval and a lot of sort of unsettled events going on around the club, and I really think that that's played a big part of this transfer window. But like you said, when Paul Mitchell comes in, you think, here we go. He's someone who's got contacts all over the place. He's going to be able to find these gems for us. He's going to be working with a lot of resources that he maybe hasn't had to that level before. But there was the whole interview in Germany where Paul Mitchell did his interview, and Eddie Howe was asked about the England job, and he used that interview process to basically sort of try and put his flag in the sand for his power at the club. And things like that are just difficult, like it creates a bit of a stressful situation around the whole club. And we'll just have to see how things play out, because I think those relationships are still developing, and both Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell have said that, even though they've both been at pains to say, yeah, it's fine, we like each other, we're going to get a good working relationship. It's obvious that something's been wrong and something hasn't been working quite right this summer. So Eddie Howe's power base now, Dimi, has shifted, hasn't it, quite a lot? And how much of a concern do you think that is for him and for the players and for the success of the club as a whole? Because for so long, for the last 2.5 years, we've had everyone aligned, everyone pulling in the same direction. Eddie has basically got what he's wanted, and that's how he's managed to get a successful club team playing how he wants it to play. How much of a problem do you think that is for him? And do you think the chances of him staying here long term has been reduced by the events of the summer?
I definitely think it's been reduced, only because now he's sort of, in the eyes of the club, he's just the manager, and he'll be responsible for just the team that is sort of given to him. He'll have some sort of say on the players, but at the end of the day, the football director and anyone underneath him, the scouts, are going to be the ones picking the players. So I think Eddie Howe's not used to this sort of structure. He's come from, no disrespect to those clubs, but smaller clubs where he's had full control. He can sort of say, I want this player, I want that player, and run the show that way. But again, I'll go back, most and if not all big clubs around the world and all successful clubs around the world are not run by one autocratic manager who says, I'm only going to pick these players. I'm not only coaching the team, but I'm also going to be doing all the scouting. I'm going to be choosing the players for this squad. That's not how great clubs are run. So Howe's going to have to get, if he wants to be here long term, and obviously we want him here long term, he's a great manager, he's going to have to get his head around that that's not his role anymore. And I think he's spoken about this a few times in the press conferences. He's got to find his passion. His passion is on the pitch, or his passion is training the players that he's got, but he's got to find his sort of niche now, and not sort of get bothered by whether Paul Mitchell sits above him now, and he may not force a player, but he may have the final say on a player that Eddie may not want. So it definitely shakes things up. But look, as bad as this transfer window has been, I think this is the right way to run a club. And you have the manager coaching the players, training the players, getting the best out of the squad that we have. But you have the football director getting the negotiations done, getting the players into the squad. And that, if those two work together the way it can, it'll be very smooth. But you're right. The way it's sort of structured at the moment, it's definitely thrown a spanner in the works to Eddie. And he's going to have to get used to it pretty quickly, I would say.
Even Klopp, at Liverpool, had this where he had decisions made about transfers, and he had an input into it, but he didn't have final say. Or I think when they signed Salah, I think he wanted someone else. I can't remember who it was, but it was someone who has not been anywhere near as successful as Salah was. And that you want everyone aligned and pulling in the same direction, don't you? I think, and it hasn't felt this summer like that's what's been happening. It's felt like no one's really known what direction they've been pulling, because it's all been so new and the relationships have been so new, and it was such a shift from when Amanda Staveley was there and they loved Eddie and everyone loved each other and everything was great and happy and sunshine and flowers, and it hasn't been that way. But like you said, this is the way successful football clubs now operate, and you don't have that all-knowing, all-seeing manager figure like Alex Ferguson anymore. Like that doesn't really happen. And like I said, even Klopp didn't have all that power to himself. You would hope that there'd be some sort of common ground that would come to where Eddie says, look, to play the kind of football I want and that, you know, the fans want to see, and to have it the best chance of success, we need players of so-and-so profile in this position. You're the scouting team, you know, Steve Nixon, you go away and find me players who've got this profile, and then I'll have a look at the videos and maybe do my own bit of scouting on them as well, and do the character checks or whatever you've got to do. But there has to be more than, you know, one person on that list, and they've all said quite a lot this summer. We will only sign people who are going to improve the first team, and we want players of a certain profile, and that's going to narrow things down a bit. And, you know, we don't want to be in a position where we're signing someone on a 5-year contract who is not the ideal kind of player we want, and we can't afford to be taking risks and all that sort of stuff, you know. Like, and again, just reference Liverpool, they went out for Zubamendi from Sociedad and they didn't get him, and this is not the first time they've done this. They said no, we'll wait and we'll go with what we've got until we can get who we really want. So it's kind of like a responsible way financially to run the club as well, but it is definitely not a good look when you spend so long chasing one player who when you're getting the runaround from their chairman as well, who's going on to all the media, doing all the interviews, who's basically just taking the piss, really. And that's how it felt.
Yep.
That's how it felt for 3 or 4 weeks, and it was getting more and more frustrating. And we were having all these stories every day. Oh, it's getting closer. It's getting closer. They were feeding the media, and I don't know. It didn't sound like it was ever anywhere near getting done. So that's how it's probably got to be, doesn't it? You made an interesting point about Eddie is going to have to basically learn how to work within this, where he's the head coach and you've got everyone else who's doing their job, who are all skilled in what they do. But it seems like there's been some kind of breakdown in the scouting as well, maybe because we know that Steve Nixon will have a list of names, you know, and he'll have been tasked to find players, and Eddie's got Andy Howe there as well, who obviously trusts really well, who he was promoted to assistant of scouting or something. So why do you think we just ended up with, essentially it seems we just had one name or one person that we were really interested in signing, and we weren't willing to go anywhere else? Because again, that just seems like poor planning and certainly poor execution of whatever plan there was.
Yeah, it looked like amateur hour because you're right. Steve Parish was essentially taking the piss, and he'd maybe saying one thing to the club privately, but then publicly he was saying another thing, and you just knew he was dragging it out. And I mean, the thing that I find staggering is, you're right, Steve Nixon he would have a pool of players that he's given to the football director, the manager, and he would have said, these are the guys that we should be going for. The thing that I don't understand, and I don't think will ever come out, is who actually was leading the negotiations. It says it was Paul Mitchell, but then he's obviously, we'll talk about his interview, but he's subsequently come out and said he took a back step. He wasn't really heavily involved as much as he normally would be. So I'd like to know who, which we may never know, who actually was the one leading the negotiations. And surely after a week and nothing was signed, you have to move on, or you have to be working on other stuff. I mean, any negotiation is, if it drags out for 3 or 4 weeks, that's not good. That's not a good negotiating skill. So it sort of it looked, we made ourselves and Crystal Palace, by them going out to the media and sort of talking about it in terms of their owner, it made us look like an amateur run club, and sort of shows how far we still have to go to sort of become the club that we want to become, because there's no way any so-called top 6 or big club around Europe would get the runaround like we were for 4 weeks. And again, no disrespect, but by Crystal Palace, we're not getting the runaround by another top club who didn't want to sell their best player. It just made us look like absolute idiots, and now we've left ourselves with 3 centre halves who are fit, and God forbid something happens to one of those 3, or if not 2 of those 3, then we're completely fucked. But it does raise the eyebrows as to who was leading the negotiations, and that's probably the $65 or $70 million question, which we'll never find out.
Yeah, and it doesn't really add up that we've got the PSR problems that we know about, and we're limited what we can spend, even though we've gone into a new reporting year, so
that doesn't make sense.
leeway.
Yeah,
but it doesn't make sense that we would then go out and say, right, well, here's £70 million for a defender who's good, very good defender,
correct.
and he's a good age and he's a good character, and he's been playing for England and everything, but he's basically at the top of his value because he's got 2 years left on his contract. And it just doesn't add up that we would then go and try and spend all that money on one player when we really needed players in two positions, really, like two very clear positions.
Yeah.
And again, I can understand if the club don't feel like they can get a right winger for, less than, say, 50, 60 million, and we can't go and buy two £50 million players in one window. But it still doesn't make sense that you would go and try and essentially overpay for someone who we might be able to sign him for half of that in 6 months or less than 6 months, or certainly by next summer, you'll be on the market for a lot less than that. So whatever's gone on, it just doesn't quite add up. And Palace they captained him, they played him in every game, they cup tied him, and it was just it was embarrassing all along, and it was like, we were just sitting there thinking, hoping that we would actually get it done, because all of this will be worth it when he's playing for us and when he's doing well. But it's just not been worth it. It was a really frustrating 4-week period where you would have expected the club to be doing other things at the same time, wouldn't you?
Yeah. Well, a professionally run club doesn't put all their eggs in one basket, and the thing that really shit me, which was the reason why I was going to do that rant the day after the window, was the club. Eddie Howe kept saying that, we don't have money to spend, we don't want to handicap ourselves, but we're sitting there offering 65 million plus 5 million add-ons for Mark Gahey, who is a 24-year-old. He's a good player, a very good player, and he'd be a fantastic acquisition for us. But you can't tell me in one breath we're willing to spend £7 million on a Christoph, but we can't find a right winger or another centre half amongst the whole football globe. We're having a chat before how I've got right back into Football Manager. I can guarantee I'll find a right winger and a centre back for £70 million. No problem. I mean, there's a vast array of players. Again, who's picking the players? Is Eddie is rejecting the players again? He said he wasn't rejecting the players, but this is where I was getting annoyed, because there's not like we're shopping in. We keep saying we're shopping in a small pool of players, but that small pool of players is still very, very big. It's not like we're just going for a very small pool. So that part doesn't make sense, and I don't think I'll ever understand why for 4 weeks a professionally run club said the only player we can sign is Mark Gahey for 60 plus million, and we're willing to spend 60 plus million, but we're not willing to spend any other money on anyone else. It's just stupid.
Yeah, and we knew the positions we really needed. The scouting team have known this for 12 months. We haven't upgraded right wing since the takeover. So we haven't upgraded right wing since the club got taken over. So, like, Steve Nixon and Andy Howe will have a long list, surely, of players who fit the attributes, who can press, who can score goals, who can assist. So it's just like, to be chucking in, like, and I think there's a dispute over whether we actually did bid for Anthony Elanga, but even then, talk of a 40-50 million pound bid for someone who's been there all the time.
Yeah,
we could have had him.
It was 50.
We could have had him.
Apparently, it was 50 plus million as well.
Yeah, we could have had him for 15 million 2 years ago when Forest got him. So, yeah, none of it really just makes sense. And I don't believe that Eddie Howe is sitting there saying, I only want Mark Gahey and that's it. Like, I just do not believe that he's doing that. I think, but at the same time, the scouting has been good for the last few years. So something's happened here. And what's happened as well since is that immediately all of these long reads came out about what had gone on, and some people are in Eddie Howe's corner, like the Athletic, very much, and they're probably still being fed a little bit from Amanda Staveley. Maybe, you know, she's still got insight into what's been going on, so they're very much in Eddie Howe's corner. And they were saying that, you know, he said himself, I didn't just have one target. There was multiple targets the club had. But then Paul Mitchell's come out, and we'll talk about his interview now. So he did this on Wednesday last week. He had a 90-minute sit down with the local journalists, and he said that the focus was too narrow. He basically washed his hands of it and said, "I wasn't there driving this. I was just there facilitating a preset strategy." And he also said things like Eddie was very clear about what he wanted. He kind of contradicted Howe, because Howe said that he wasn't really involved. Every time he was asked, "Oh, I don't know what's going on with the transfers. I'm not across that." Paul Mitchell said this spoke every day for at least an hour. So there was all this stuff that to me, this interview, and you know, Paul Mitchell will not be judged on this transfer window because he's going to have time, and you know, he needs to settle in, and it's hard coming into that scenario. But it did read to me like he was kind of washing his hands of it a bit and saying, "Look, not me. Like it was already there, and I was just sort of following what we were told to be doing." But yeah, like he was critical of previous windows. He said that there was overspend on certain players, which I don't even know who he's talking about, unless it's Matt Target, you know, or maybe Chris Wood. But that was different context when we signed those players. I think he was a little bit patronizing towards Eddie Howe. He said, "Oh, Eddie understands this," or "Eddie's a smart guy." You know, he kept on saying like Eddie gets it, and Eddie realizes you can't do this and this and that. Paul Mitchell talked about having a 5-year target. So he said between 3 and 5 years, there's like a 3 and 5 year cycle. So we're back to the 5-year targets after Amanda's 5-year target to win the Champions League. But yeah, like there was a lot in there. It was really frustrating trying to find somewhere to actually watch this in full, or to get full quotes, because every journalist had their own different spin on it. You can read Craig Hope's version of it, which is very negative, and then Mark Douglas was a bit more balanced. I don't actually think doing a 90-minute sit down with journalists in that way, if he wants to get a message out, maybe just do it in-house with the club. But then I guess he could be accused of not answering difficult questions. But there was a lot to pick out from it. It was a bit bitty trying to actually find the quotes. What did you make of it, Dimi? The interview and the format it happened, and what it means for everything going forward now.
Yeah, I found it fascinating, to be honest. I thought a lot of the things that Paul Mitchell thought. Obviously, I love Eddie Howe. I'll say this first, but a lot of the things that Mitchell thought or said is things that I thought has happened. When he came in early July, I thought it would have been difficult for him to sort of straight away put his stamp on the club. Maybe in his own mind, or maybe the club said, "Look, sit back. We've got some targets in place. We'll get these signings over the line, and you can sort of take over from there." But the way it sounded from his interview, again, depending on which journalist you read the article from, was that Eddie and the team and the previous regime, or the previous power structure, were in charge, and I didn't have as much say as I could have. And I mean, if you look at Paul Mitchell's record and Paul Mitchell's backlog, he's been at some big European clubs, and he's got a track record of attracting some fantastic players and having a great eye for talent across Europe. So the fact that he wasn't able to put his stamp on the club is if that's the case, is frustrating. And it does seem like there's something going to be brewing in January. And if shit hits the fan again in January, I'm not sure what's gonna happen post that. I think there could be some further people to leave the club if that happens. But I'd hope that Eddie Howe, in his first press conference this week, when leading up to the Wolves game, is asked some of those questions back. Not that we're going to get a back and forth, and obviously transfer window is over, but it is curious that he did say that I sort of was on the periphery, and it wasn't really my plan to be focusing just on the one player and spending all this time on one player. So again, like I said before, if it wasn't Paul Mitchell and it wasn't Eddie Howe, who was it? Who was the one who, in their right mind, in their 1 hour daily chat, said, "Oh, yep, so Palace said they're going to accept, or Palace said this and Palace said that," for 4 weeks, and no one did anything about it. It just someone's telling a porky pie, and I'm not sure who it is. Obviously, Eddie in the press conferences can be very the truth, but it doesn't scream that interview of a harmonious stuff, and it is probably, luckily for us, we don't have we have another 3 or 4 months until the next transfer window, but it definitely needs to be smoothed out. Whatever's gone on in this transfer window, and whatever Paul Mitchell's perspective is, I think it needs to be smoothed out. But just one quick point on what players we're going after as well. I think half the issue at the moment, it seems, is we've only got sort of one. It seems like we've got one particular type of player. And it's, again, I'll bring it back to Football Manager. It's like when you search for players on the scouting system and you're that specific, you only have like 5 or 6 players that reach a certain criteria in Football Manager. And maybe Eddie Howe's got this crazy system where he's got every player has to reach a certain level on his criteria. And then if they don't, we don't sign them. I think that's that needs to be adjusted. And hopefully Paul Mitchell can sort of revamp that whole structure, because whatever happened in July and whatever happened in August, it definitely isn't the way a football club like us who want to grow and be a top 4, top 6 challenger should be run.
Yeah, if Eddie is sitting there saying, "I only want Mark Gahey," then it's up to the club and Paul Mitchell and Darren Eales to say, "Well, no, like that's not reasonable." So
correct.
This is, we've got this money, and we've got these targets, these options. We cannot stretch to Mark Gahey or your number 1 target at this point. These are the other options. This is how much it's going to cost. This is what we can afford. Yes, it's maybe a bit more risky to have someone from overseas who might not settle as quickly, or who we don't know as much about the character or whatever it may be. But that it's their role then in this model to say, well, no, this is what we're going to do. And you've just got to get on with it. And you've got to coach this player to be the best he can possibly be. And that's what you're good at. And this is what we're good at, picking players and negotiating and making deals happen, and then improving the squad overall, And it's the sign of a well-run club that even with the managers, they're planning ahead, And Brighton have been referenced a lot this summer, and we don't actually know they've had a good start, but they've taken risks, and I think Tony Bloom there is a gambler. That's what he's made his money from, and he's done it very well. But yeah, they've got a system where they always know the next manager who it's going to be, and that's not anything against the current manager. It's just the way it's got to be when you're a properly run football club. Look at the mess Man United made of it this summer when they wanted to sack Ten Hag, but they couldn't, essentially, because first he won the FA Cup, and then they couldn't find anyone. They very publicly tried to find anybody other than him to take over, and they couldn't find anybody. So I think it's nothing against Eddie for the club to be back himself a little bit and saying, well, this is what we're going to do. We've got a plan for the future, and that includes squad building and also planning for the future of who the manager is going to be. Because Eddie, let's not forget, Eddie could be offered the England job, soon, and he could go. And then the club they don't need to be on the back foot with that. They need to have been proactive and have an idea about who they want already. So yeah, there's a lot to talk through and a lot to pick out what's happened. And like you said, we're probably never going to get the full truth, but we definitely need people to be aligned from January and everyone to be pulling in the same direction. Yep. And if that doesn't happen, there is going to be problems, definitely. So where do you think the consequences and the fallout from all of this, where do you think this leaves the club now in terms of the PIF project, and also the sort of the immediate aims and the immediate targets for the season? Because before the end of the transfer window, Darren Eales and Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell were all talking about Europe to be the target. But what do you think? Do you think that still is the aim, or should be the aim, or do you think expectations have to be adjusted now because of what's gone on?
No, like you guys know, I'm a very positive person. I think that still should 100% be the aim, and there's no reason why we still can't push, in my opinion, for top four football. But the issue we've got is we've just put ourselves under immense pressure in terms of if we get a bad run of injuries again, we just don't have enough quality, especially at centre back. It's the frustrating thing is we've actually got a very good squad or a very good first at parts, and we've got plenty of quality players already at our club. We just need a couple extra sort of bodies to take us to that next level. And I mean, the PIF project, I'm not sure whether they didn't understand the rules or what they were buying into in terms of how they could get their money into our club. But I think one area where they completely underestimated was the sponsorship issues they're going to have and the related party trends, which everyone in the Premier League was jumping up and down about in terms of getting us favorable sponsorship deals with Saudi companies. And I mean, we can go down that rabbit hole, but there'll probably not be another 2 hours show in terms of what Man City have done in the past and what other clubs continue to do with their related parties. But the frustrating thing is we've got the richest owners in terms of what their worth is, but it means nothing. We can't spend the money because we don't earn enough money, and we were in such a black hole for 15 years under the previous ownership. We just haven't got any sort of built up fund of revenue streams that we can sort of just go bang. So, I mean, we've signed Adidas now, and that's great. We're starting to get all these random sponsors, which Man City have as well, which is great. Sponsorship the tea room, sponsorship the socks, the shorts, who knows, whatever it is, you get a sponsor for it. But we're still coming from a long way back, and I think PIF are going to have to adjust their expectations. I don't think the fans realistically thought we're going to win Champions Leagues in 5 years or Premier Leagues in 10 years. We I think all deep down knew it was going to take a little bit longer for us to jump up, and we did jump up very quickly into the top four. But I think from their perspective, we just got to hope that they've got the same patience and they're not going to get bored of the Premier League and say, "Oh, stuff this. We don't see value in the Premier League anymore. Let's go put money into Formula One or could put money back into golf and do it that way." So that I think in terms of your first question, our expectations still should be European football, and if we keep a fit squad, I think we can still do it. And pending January, who knows what we do then? But I think we should definitely still be aiming for European football.
Paul Mitchell said that when he spoke to the PIF guys and Yasser was there as well, he said that their ambition is there, you know, like and they haven't been deterred at all by the PSR stuff and like you said, the associated party transactions. Like they've been hit with factors that they probably didn't foresee when they bought the club, but and then the on the pitch success came very quickly, probably quicker than they thought as well. So it hasn't been sort of a steady, linear progression. There has been a lot of work that's gone on with the sponsorships, and the revenues have grown, and they're going to grow again in the next financial results that come out in January. So that's it's on the right track, but maybe just a sort of a realignment of expectation in terms of this is going to take a long time. It's going to take longer than we hoped, and maybe some of this first great exciting team we've had are not going to be around, you know, when we do start winning leagues and things, because I think that players like Bruno and Isak, they're going to want Champions League football sooner rather than later. So if we can't offer them it, and Anthony Gordon as well, probably, you know, maybe we'll just have to let them go and then reinvest the money. But by that point, we need our scouting to be up to scratch, and we need the strategy to be there. So there's a clear plan for everybody to follow. And in terms of this season, let's not forget that if Nick Pope hadn't got injured, and I do really think it's this clear, if he hadn't got injured, we would have been in Europe this season. We probably would have been fifth, I would say. I think fifth or sixth at least. So that, and Joe Linton was another one, but we're very reliant on keeping those players fit. But if you look at players like Pope and Botman when he's back, and you look at Bruno, Tonali, Joe Linton, Isak, Gordon, these are these are Champions League level players, I think. So there's no question that if we can keep these players fit and, you know, everyone's getting up to speed a bit, and we've managed to get 7 points despite not playing well at all. And we've got Tonali back, and anybody who saw his assists, as I'm sure everyone has from the Italy game the other day, he is going to be some player for us this season, and I think it's going to be so exciting to see him start games for us soon. So I think Europe is definitely still very much on, and I don't see any reason why we wouldn't get that as long as we don't have another huge bad run of injuries. And we do have money to spend in January. We know that as well, so we can refresh things a bit. But there's plenty of time to go before January. You just said before that you're a very positive person, and I am as well when it comes to Newcastle. And I've said all along, let's just trust the process, trust what they're doing. It feels a bit disconcerting that we can't say trust the process anymore, because the people in charge of setting the process and the strategy have changed, and the new people have not had a good first run at it. It hasn't been a good impression initially, and there's a bit of negativity towards Darren Eales as well, because he's the person who's running the show now. So I think he has to improve certainly his image. Like he's a man of the people sort of character. He goes to the stacks singing songs. He's good with the fans and all that stuff. But you know, this isn't Atlanta United. This isn't a startup club. This is a century-old football club. You know, we need he needs to start maybe behaving in that way, and he needs to start setting the strategy really, and pulling everything together and making sure that Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell are getting on, and that everyone is pulling in the same direction. That's his job. That's what Amanda Staveley was very good at, making sure people were aligned. What's your thoughts on Darren Eales and his sort of contribution to all this? Because there's definitely been a shift in the attitudes towards him and how people are feeling towards him lately.
Yeah, definitely a lot to prove. I mean, it's hard to know exactly. I mean, he is the CEO, but again, we don't know what his remit is and what his actual day-to-day responsibilities. A lot of the time, the CEO oversees those below him and sort of make sure everybody's swimming in the right direction and everyone's sort of doing what their jobs are. There can be moments where a CEO isn't actually involved in the nitty-gritty as much as you'd think. To be honest, I didn't like what he was when he was singing and chanting at that new venue across the way from St James's Park. It did give me thoughts of a previous owner of ours who was Neck and Beers at the Emirates, and everyone thought, "Oh, how good's this? He's got a Newcastle top on Neck and Beers, and he's one of us." But that can be a bit of a facade if you don't deliver on what your job is. And his job as a CEO is to make sure those below him and the club is being run like a professional football, and we are getting the job done not only on the pitch but especially off the pitch. And at the moment, it's definitely a huge work in progress for him, because he's got a lot of goodwill to win back with the fans, especially because I think he's been more so than Mitchell. He's been the scapegoat, especially on the socials, about what's happened in this transfer window. So he's got 3 months to get himself together or get the structure together to make sure that January is a successful one, and then we move forward from there. But definitely the jury's out on him. But again, it's hard for us to judge the role of a CEO. We don't exactly know what he's doing. All we can see is the garbage or the sort of the disaster that was the transfer window, and that sort of falls under his remit. And if that's under his remit, he's in the end responsible. So far, not so good, but let's see how January ends. And if it ends the same way it ended this transfer window, I dare say he's not going to be showing his face as much as he is at the moment.
He won't be singing in the stack anymore, yeah. I think Craig Hope basically blamed him for forcing Goodisi and Staveley out. It's Craig Hope's slant on things, which is always often negative, but he basically said that Eales had said that he can't do his job with Amanda and Mehrdad there sort of having input. So I think one last sort of point, communication is good. So it's good to hear from the club. It's good to have these quotes and these words from key decision makers, because it's not fair for Eddie Howe to have to stand there every Friday and answer for things that are not necessarily his decision. So I think that's good that the club are doing this, but at the same time, they need to, like, words can only go so far. They need to actually back it up now, and they didn't do that this summer. That they said some things that can come back to bite them. Darren Neal's talked about thinking outside the box with the transfer window, and they've talked about strengthening the squad, putting every penny into it in every transfer window to strengthen the squad. So they just have to be really careful about what they say, because people will remember it, and people will clip it up, and people will throw it back at them if they don't do that. But maybe it's a good thing that they've got to be accountable. Like, they have to be accountable for what they say, and they have to follow through with actions, because the Newcastle United fan base will not have the wool pulled over their eyes, and especially now, like, they've had a lot of credit in the bank. There's been a lot of positivity towards everybody, and everyone's been still riding this wave of joy, really, since the takeover, and relief and all of that stuff. Even though last season was difficult, I think people still felt positive towards the club and the direction of travel. But now they're going to have to back up what they're saying with actions, and that's in the transfer window, and making sure that everyone, like we said, we talk about that word alignment and unity again, and everyone pulling in the same direction. And that's been missing a bit this summer, but hopefully it's going to be back. And I'm just pleased that the football's back as well now, so we don't have to think about this until after Christmas, so we can go and enjoy Christmas, and then we won't stress about the transfer window until January. By which point, Dimi, there will be a plan, and there will be a strategy, and it will all be much better, won't it?
They better fucking be. That's all I got to say. Because if you thought I was going to go on a rant after this transfer window, and if we don't sign anyone in January, and shit hits the fan again, I think I don't know what I'll do. I think probably not safe for YouTube or Spotify or whatever platform we're on these days. I think let's just say let's hope January goes better.
You will be at that airport on the flight to Newcastle.
I would not
with a pitchfork.
Yeah, well, you say funny things like that. They don't. I have threatened to do that in the past for other football clubs that I've followed, and look, I may have to make a jaunt to Tyneside, just jaunt for a few days, and I don't know what I'll do, but look, I don't think it'll get to that. I think we'll have a good January, but let's not go down that path in January, shall we?
No, let's not. All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you, Dimi. We will be back later this week. We're going to be talking to Stu from the Wolves podcast, who we first spoke to about 3 years ago. So it'd be good to talk to him again to preview that match. Take it easy. Thank you very much. And I think it's bedtime now.
Cheers, mate.
Cheers.